The night in Manhattan glittered like a jewel box. Neon signs shimmered over glass towers, and the avenue outside the Grand Plaza Hotel buzzed with sleek black cars, chauffeurs in uniform, and guests in gowns that sparkled under the streetlights. Inside, the grand ballroom throbbed with the laughter of New York's elite. Champagne flutes raised as deals and marriages were casually negotiated under chandeliers worth more than an average house. At the far edge of the marble-floored lobby, Emily Carter adjusted the stiff collar of her cheap white uniform. Her reflection in the polished brass trim showed a young woman with tired eyes, blonde hair tied into a tight ponytail, and determination etched into every line of her face. She had been on her feet for 12 hours, first a morning shift at a Brooklyn cafe, then this night job behind the front desk of the Grand Plaza. What weighed heavier than exhaustion was the number constantly echoing in her head. $200,000, that was the debt her late parents had left behind, compounded by interest. Every paycheck went straight to the bank, leaving almost nothing for her and her younger brother. Tonight she hadn't even eaten dinner. She'd swallowed a stale sandwich between check-ins. "Carter!" Her manager's voice snapped across the desk like a whip. "Move faster. We don't pay you to stare at your nails." Emily clenched her jaw, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, sir." She typed in the next guest's name, though her hands trembled slightly. She didn't notice that a man had stopped a few yards away, half hidden by one of the marble columns. Alexander Grant. He was tall, his tailored tuxedo fitting like armor, his presence impossible to ignore. The CEO of Grant Corporation had grown accustomed to being the center of every room he walked into. Yet tonight he had slipped out of the gala to escape his mother's relentless parade of eligible brides, socialites with pedigrees, fortune, and the approval of high society. His steel-grey eyes landed on Emily just as her manager berated her. Something in the way she straightened her back, refusing to cower, caught him off guard. A hotel clerk in an ill-fitting uniform, yet there was pride there. Defiance. Before he could dwell on it, a sudden flash blinded the lobby. Reporters spilled out from the ballroom, their cameras firing. "Mr. Grant, rumors say you're engaged, is it true? Are you marrying the Winslow heiress?" Alexander's expression hardened. He despised being cornered by the press. But before he could cut them off, Emily moved. She grabbed a folder from the desk, walked quickly to his side, and slipped between him and the cameras. "Sir, here are the documents you asked for," she said firmly, her tone professional, as if she were his assistant rather than a clerk. Confused, the reporters hesitated. Emily seized the moment, steering Alexander toward a side corridor. "This way, Mr. Grant." For a brief, surreal moment, he allowed it. The girl barely reached his shoulder, but she moved with surprising authority, shielding him from the swarm. When they turned a corner and the voices faded, she stopped, lowering the folder. "There," she said softly, catching her breath. "You don't owe me thanks." "I just thought you looked like you could use an escape." Alexander studied her in silence. Up close, her eyes were green, clear and steady despite the weariness in her features. She looked nothing like the women his mother introduced to him, those flawless, polished creatures bred for society. This girl had fire. His gaze flicked to the name tag pinned crookedly to her blouse. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice low. She blinked, surprised that he'd spoken her name aloud. "Yes, sir." Something unreadable flickered across his face. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his polished shoes echoing down the corridor. Emily exhaled slowly, pressing the folder to her chest. To her, he was just another untouchable billionaire, a figure glimpsed from afar. She couldn't imagine their paths crossing again. But fate was already shifting. In a few days, Alexander Grant would seek her out, not as a passing stranger, but as the solution to his most pressing problem, and her life would never be the same. 3 days passed. Emily thought she would never see him again. After that strange night in the hotel corridor, she had gone back to folding towels, checking in impatient guests, and counting every dollar for rent. Her life was measured in overdue bills and subway tickets, not tuxedos and champagne galas. That morning, she had taken the train from Brooklyn, rain dripping from her thin coat. By the time she arrived at the Grant Plaza, her shoes were soaked. She tied her hair back tighter, pasted on the neutral smile she wore like armor, and braced herself for another double shift. "Carter!" the manager barked as she walked in. "You've got a private appointment." "Conference room B, don't keep him waiting," her brows knit. She never had private appointments. Clerks didn't meet anyone in conference rooms, but she obeyed. When she opened the door, her breath caught. He was there. Alexander Grant. The billionaire sat at the head of a long mahogany table, one hand resting on a leather folder, the other on a crystal glass of water. His presence filled the room more than the chandeliers overhead. He looked up, and those grey eyes pinned her in place. "Miss Carter," he said evenly, as if they had known each other for years.
"Sit." She hesitated, clutching the strap of her worn handbag.
"Mr. Grant."
"I think there's been a mistake." There's no mistake." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "I asked for you." Her pulse raced as she slid into the chair across from him.
"Why?" He opened the folder. Inside lay a neat stack of documents. "I require a wife," he said, his tone as calm as if he were discussing quarterly profits. Emily blinked.
Excuse me?" Alexander leaned back, watching her reaction.
"My mother insists that I marry by the end of the year, or she will withdraw her shares from Grant Corporation. That would destabilize the company. I have no interest in marrying the women she chooses. But after the other night," his gaze sharpened, "you showed a quality I find useful: nerve, quick thinking. The ability to play a role convincingly." Emily's mouth went dry. "You can't be serious." "I am always serious." He pushed the papers toward her. "A 1-year marriage contract. In exchange, you will receive $3 million wired to your account upon completion." The number hit her like a physical blow. $3 million. Enough to pay her parents' debts, her brother's tuition, and still have a life left over. She shook her head, heart pounding.
"Why me? You don't even know me." "I don't need to know you," he replied, unyielding.
"I need a wife who won't cling, who understands this is a transaction. You want freedom from your debts."
"I want freedom from my mother's leash."
"We can give each other what we need." Emily stared at the papers, her hands trembling. Her whole life had been about survival. She had never been offered choice, only struggle. And now this man was offering her escape. But at what cost? Her voice was barely a whisper.
"You're asking me to sell myself?" "No," Alexander corrected, his tone precise.
"I'm asking you to negotiate. The difference is power." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The ticking of the wall clock was deafening. Finally, Emily pushed back her chair. "I need time." Alexander's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You have 72 hours. After that, the offer expires." As she left the conference room, her knees almost buckled. The folder felt heavier than lead in her bag. She had no idea if she was stepping towards salvation or ruin. The folder lay on Emily's kitchen table like a loaded gun. For 3 days, it stared at her, whispering promises and threats every time she walked past. The papers inside, dozens of them, were crisp, weighty, and official, full of clauses she barely understood. But one number blazed in her mind no matter how she tried to ignore it: $3,000. She sat in the dim light of her tiny Brooklyn apartment, elbows on the table, head in her hands. The walls were thin here. She could hear her neighbor's television through the plaster, the muffled cries of a baby 2 doors down, the rattle of pipes that never worked properly. Her own refrigerator hummed unevenly, threatening to die at any moment. She lived paycheck to paycheck, often choosing between groceries and utility bills. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Emily, the bank called again. They said if we don't pay at least half by next week, they'll repossess the house.
"I don't know what to do."
Emily closed her eyes, her chest tightening. She could almost hear her mother's voice, weary and trembling. Years of hospital bills, debts piled on debts. Her father gone too soon, her younger brother's tuition hanging in the balance. Her family was drowning, and she was barely keeping her own head above water. Her gaze drifted back to the folder. 3 million. It was obscene. It was salvation. But the cost. She imagined herself walking down an aisle in a dress that wasn't chosen for love, but for business, standing next to a man who saw her as a solution, not a partner.
Living in a gilded cage, pretending to be something she wasn't. What am I even worth?
She thought bitterly. Is my life really for sale? The memory of Alexander's eyes haunted her, the way they had studied her like a chess piece he intended to move across the board. Cold, commanding, impossible to read, and yet something in that gaze had unsettled her. It wasn't just calculation. It was loneliness too. A loneliness so sharp she had felt it like a mirror of her own. That night she didn't sleep. By dawn she knew her decision. The black town car arrived at noon, gleaming like an omen at the curb. Emily stood on the cracked sidewalk with her single suitcase, her worn coat wrapped tightly around her. The driver, a man in a dark suit, opened the door without a word. Her heart thundered as she slid into the leather seat. The city passed in a blur outside the tinted windows, graffiti walls, crowded bodegas, endless traffic. And then slowly, the scenery changed. Buildings grew taller, cleaner, shinier. Storefronts became luxury boutiques. The sidewalks filled with women in heels, men in tailored suits. By the time the car turned onto Fifth Avenue, she felt as if she'd been transported to another world. And then she saw it. The Grant estate. It wasn't a house. It was a palace disguised as a mansion, rising with columns of white stone and glass, guarded by iron gates that swung open at their approach. Manicured lawns stretched across the grounds. Fountains sparkled in the afternoon light, and the driveway curved toward an entrance that looked more like the lobby of a grand hotel. Emily gripped her suitcase so tightly her knuckles whitened. She thought she'd been prepared. She hadn't been. The doors opened, and Alexander himself appeared at the top of the marble steps. He was immaculate in a charcoal suit, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He descended slowly, like a man accustomed to people waiting for him. When his gaze found hers, she felt a tremor in her chest she didn't want to acknowledge. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice deep, precise. "Welcome." Her throat was dry. I suppose this makes it official." He studied her for a beat, then gave a slight nod. "The papers are filed. From this moment forward, you are Mrs. Grant." The words landed like a verdict. Inside, the estate gleamed with chandeliers, sweeping staircases, and corridors lined with paintings she could never hope to afford, even if she worked for 1,000 years. Servants moved quietly, bowing slightly when Alexander passed. They looked at her with polite curiosity, their eyes flickering over her inexpensive coat, her nervous stance. She felt like an intruder, a street urchin who had somehow slipped into a kingdom. Alexander guided her into a private sitting room. Closing the door behind them, "You will have your own quarters," he said, handing her a key card. "Third floor, East Wing. Staff will assist you. Publicly, we are husband and wife. Privately, nothing changes." "This is a contract, not a romance." Emily swallowed hard. "You don't have to remind me." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Good. You should also know my mother is skeptical. She will test you."
Fail, and this arrangement collapses. Her pulse quickened. "You mean—"
"She doesn't believe I'm good enough." A pause. "She doesn't believe anyone is." The bitterness in his tone surprised her. For the first time, she glimpsed a crack in his armor. But then his expression hardened again, and he moved toward the door. "Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." When he left, Emily sank onto the velvet sofa, her suitcase still by her side. She had crossed the line. She had stepped into his world, and now there was no going back. That evening, as she stood before the mirror in the room that was now hers, Emily hardly recognized the woman staring back. One of the maids had insisted she wear a gown from the wardrobe, an elegant navy dress that skimmed her figure, paired with diamond earrings borrowed from the estate's vault. Her hair had been styled, her lips painted a subtle shade of red. She looked like she belonged, but her eyes betrayed her. Wide, uncertain, frightened. When she entered the dining hall, Alexander was already seated at the head of the long table. Candles glowed, silver gleamed, and the meal was arranged like art on porcelain plates. He glanced up as she took her seat across from him. "You clean up well," he remarked casually. Emily's jaw tightened. "That's comforting. I'd hate for my worth to drop below 3 million now." A flicker of something, amusement maybe, crossed his face.
"Careful, Mrs. Grant. That tongue of yours might be the end of you." She held his gaze, refusing to back down.
"Or it might be the only thing keeping me alive in this house." Silence, stretched, taut, and dangerous. Then, unexpectedly, Alexander's lips curved. It wasn't a full smile, but it was close. For the first time, she wondered if this arrangement would break her, or change her. The invitation was less of an invitation and more of a command. "Family dinner, tonight, 8 o'clock?" Alexander told her at breakfast, his tone as casual as if he were announcing the weather. He didn't look up from his coffee, but his words carried the weight of inevitability. Emily, still in her borrowed silk robe, froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth.
"Family dinner?"
"My mother hosts them every month."
"Attendance is non-negotiable." The way he said it made her stomach knot.
She already knew about the mother, Vivian Grant, society doyenne, philanthropist, board member, and matriarchy. Her name was synonymous with power. To people like Emily, she was practically royalty. And Emily was about to sit at her table, pretending to be her son's wife. By the time the evening came, Emily's nerves were fraying. She chose a modest black dress from the wardrobe, elegant but not ostentatious. The maid who helped her gave a faint nod of approval, though Emily caught the quick flash of pity in her eyes, as if she knew what Emily was walking into. The Grant dining hall glittered with chandeliers and polished silver, long enough to host diplomats. Tonight only 10 seats were filled, but the room felt like a stage. At the head of the table sat Vivian Grant, her spine straight, her diamonds catching the light with every subtle tilt of her head. Her hair was a perfect sweep of silver, her gaze cool and assessing. Alexander stood at Emily's side, hand resting lightly but firmly at her lower back, as if reminding her to play her role.
His voice was smooth as he spoke. "Mother."
"May I introduce my wife, Emily Carter Grant?" The room stilled. Forks paused mid-air, conversation froze. Every pair of eyes turned toward her, and Emily felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She forced a smile, lifting her chin just enough to seem confident. "Mrs. Grant," she said softly. Vivian's gaze swept over her like an X-ray, lingering on the plain lines of her dress, the slight nervous twitch of her hands. Then, with a faintly polite smile, she extended her hand. "Welcome, Emily." The touch was cool, the grip firm. It felt less like a greeting and more like a test. Dinner began. Crystal glasses clinked, servers moved silently, and conversations resumed, though now every word seemed tinged with curiosity about Alexander's unexpected bride. Vivian led the discussion with the effortless command of someone born to dominate a room. She asked pointed questions about politics, art, global finance. Emily listened carefully, trying to keep up. She wasn't ignorant. She'd studied hard at community college before life had dragged her down, but she was no socialite schooled in diplomacy. Finally, Vivian turned her gaze directly on her.
"And you, Emily, where did you attend university?"
The question was a blade wrapped in silk. Emily set her fork down carefully. "I attended CUNY for 2 years," she said honestly, "but had to leave to help support my family." A ripple passed down the table. One of Alexander's cousins smirked into his wineglass. Vivian's smile was tight.
I see. A practical choice. A tone suggested otherwise. And your family, are they local?
Emily felt the flush creep higher, but before she could answer, Alexander's voice cut in, low and decisive. Emily's family is hard-working. That is all that matters. The authority in his tone silenced the table. Vivian's gaze flicked toward her son, a brief battle of wills sparking in the air. But then she inclined her head graciously and returned to her meal. Emily exhaled silently, her heart pounding. As the evening wore on, she began to find her rhythm. She answered questions with honesty, sometimes lacing her words with quiet humor. When one relative made a condescending remark about her not knowing vintage wines, she smiled sweetly and replied, "I may not know the year, but I do know when something tastes expensive enough to be overrated." Laughter bubbled around the table, and for the first time the ice began to crack. Even Vivian's lips curved, just barely. Dessert arrived, soufflé so delicate Emily hesitated to touch them. The conversation shifted to philanthropy, and Vivian described an upcoming charity gala. Emily listened intently, then spoke up. "I work part-time at a community center in Brooklyn," she said. "We struggle to get donations, but I've seen firsthand how small contributions can change a child's life."
It doesn't take millions. Sometimes it just takes someone showing up. Her words hung in the air.
They weren't polished, but they were heartfelt. And in that moment, the table grew quiet again, not out of judgment, but out of reflection. Vivian studied her carefully.
At last she spoke.
Spoken like someone who understands the weight of responsibility. It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't dismissal either. And Emily caught the faintest glimmer of something in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps. When dinner finally ended, Emily excused herself, slipping onto the terrace to breathe the cool night air. Her hands trembled as she leaned on the balustrade, gazing out at the city lights. She had survived. She had stumbled, yes, but she had also stood her ground. A shadow fell beside her. Alexander. "You handled yourself well," he said, quietly. Emily turned, startled.
I felt like I was drowning the entire time. His lips curved slightly. "You didn't drown, you swam." Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second the mask of indifference slipped from his face.
There was pride there, approval, and something softer she couldn't name. Before she could speak, he straightened, his expression shuttered once more.
"Get used to it."
There will be more nights like this, but as he walked back inside, Emily couldn't shake the warmth blooming in her chest. For the first time since stepping into this contract, she felt she had proven, to them, to him, and maybe even to herself, that she wasn't just a pawn in Alexander Grant's game. She was someone who could stand at his side. The morning began with tension humming through the Grant estate like a storm about to break. Emily noticed it the moment she descended the marble staircase. The staff moved faster than usual, their voices hushed, their eyes flicking nervously toward the study at the end of the hall. Behind the heavy double doors, she could hear the sharp rise and fall of Alexander's voice, clipped and angry, like thunder, muffled by walls. She hesitated. It wasn't her place to intrude. She was, after all, only here by contract. But curiosity and instinct tugged her forward. She found the doors slightly ajar, just enough to glimpse the man inside. Alexander stood by the massive desk, his tie loosened, jacket discarded, hair slightly disheveled in a way she had never seen before. Papers were scattered across the polished surface, and on the large monitor behind him flashed red numbers, plummeting stock charts and urgent email notifications. "Damn it!" His fist slammed against the desk, making the crystal decanter rattle.
How did this happen?
A younger executive hovered nearby, pale and nervous. "So the press is running with the rumor about the failed merger."
Investors are panicking.
Shares have dropped nearly 7% since opening. I don't want excuses, Mason. I want solutions. Emily's heart clenched. She had only ever seen him perfectly controlled, always immaculate, always one step ahead. But now he looked human, frustrated, vulnerable. Before she could second-guess herself, she pushed the door wider and stepped inside. Both men turned.
Alexander's eyes narrowed instantly. "Emily, this isn't private, I know," she said quickly.
But maybe it shouldn't be. Mason blinked at her in confusion. Alexander's jaw tightened. This is not your concern. She took a steadying breath. Maybe it should be. 'Cause whatever affects you affects me now. Isn't that what you said? Silence stretched. For a moment she thought he would throw her out. But then something flickered in his gaze, a mix of annoyance and reluctant consideration. "Speak," he said curtly. Emily approached the desk, her palms slightly damp. She glanced at the reports, the scrolling headlines on the screen. Grant Corporation's stability in question. Merger fallout. Investor confidence shaken. She recognized the tone. It was the same way creditors had spoken about her family's debts, the same way whispers had circled when her father fell ill and they couldn't pay the hospital bills. Fear bred faster than truth. "You're letting them control the story," she said softly. "And when fear controls the story, panic wins," Mason frowned. "With respect, Mrs. Grant, this isn't exactly—" But Alexander lifted a hand, silencing him. His grey eyes stayed locked on Emily. "Go on." Her pulse hammered, but she pushed forward. "You need to get ahead of it. Call a press conference. Make a statement, not defensive, but confident.
Show them you're not shaken, that you have a plan.
Investors don't care about rumors if they believe in you. Right now, they need reassurance, not silence." Mason glanced at Alexander, clearly skeptical. But Alexander's gaze sharpened, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "Confidence over damage control," he murmured. "Exactly," Emily said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Tell them the merger falling through isn't a failure, it's a strategic decision."
Spin it, make it seem like your choice.
"People believe what you give them if you say it with certainty." The room went quiet. Alexander stepped closer, his presence overwhelming.
"And you, Emily? How do you know so much about corporate strategy?"
She swallowed.
"I don't, not really.
"But I know people."
I've seen what happens when they lose hope."
"My family lived through it. If you let panic spread, it devours everything. But if you look them in the eye and promise they'll be okay, sometimes they believe you, even when the odds are against you." For the first time since she entered, his expression softened, just a fraction. But it was enough to make her heart flutter in a way she didn't want to admit. Alexander turned sharply toward Mason. "Set it up." "Press conference in 2 hours," Mason hesitated.
"Sir, are you sure?" "I said do it." The young man scurried out, leaving them alone in the study. Emily shifted, suddenly self-conscious under the intensity of Alexander's gaze. "I didn't mean to overstep, I just—"
Wanted to help. He walked around the desk, stopping so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes.
"You may have just saved me millions," her breath caught. "I doubt that. A flicker of something, amusement? Admiration?"
Lit his features.
"You'd be surprised." The tension between them hung thick, electric.
Neither spoke for a long moment. Then Alexander reached for his tie, straightening it, reassembling his composure like armor. "Thank you, Emily," he said quietly. Not curt, not cold, genuine, and then he left the room, leaving her standing amidst the scattered papers, her heart racing, her mind spinning. 2 hours later, she watched from the wings as Alexander strode onto the stage at the press conference. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but he moved with the calm authority of a man untouchable. "Grant Corporation remains strong," he declared, his voice steady, commanding. The merger in question was declined not because of weakness, but because it did not align with our long-term vision. We choose our partnerships carefully, and we always will. The confidence in his words rippled through the room, steadying the chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously, headlines already shifting tone. Strategic choice, not collapse. When Alexander stepped down, his eyes found Emily across the crowd. For a fleeting instant, he gave her the smallest nod, acknowledgement only she could see. Her chest swelled. For the first time since entering his world, she felt like more than a prop, more than a pawn. She felt like his partner. That night, back in the estate, Alexander found her in the library. He leaned against the doorway, watching her as she traced her fingers along the spines of books older than her grandparents. "You were right," he said simply. She turned, startled.
About what? The press.
The panic.
All of it, a faint smile curved her lips. I'm glad it worked. His gaze lingered on her, softer than she'd ever seen.
"You're not what I expected, Emily Carter." Her heart skipped. "And what did you expect? A liability." He paused. "You're not?" For once, she couldn't find a witty retort. Her cheeks warmed under his scrutiny, and she quickly looked away, pretending to examine a nearby shelf, but inside, something dangerous was beginning to take root, and she wasn't sure either of them could stop it. The late afternoon light poured through the tall windows of the Grant study, turning the room into a quiet pool of gold. Emily had agreed to meet Ryan Miller there, only because the estate's proximity made it easier for her to attend to matters for the community center without drawing attention to herself. Ryan's voice on the phone had been urgent but warm, the same voice she had leaned on during hard semesters and long nights at college. Steady, familiar, a tether to a part of her life that felt honest. Ryan arrived with the ease of someone who had never lost his place in her story. He was still the same, clean-cut, a lawyer with a soft jawline and eyes that laughed easily. He greeted Alexander with polite deference, then turned to Emily with a smile that made a small, reflexive warmth bloom in her chest. "Em," he said, stepping forward and offering a quick clasp of her forearm, the kind of friendly contact that existed between people who had once been close and still cared. "I brought the paperwork for the center.
Also, there's someone from a foundation who wants to meet.
They asked if I could bring them by for a tour." Emily's face brightened.
That would be amazing.
"The kids would..." Her words trailed into gratitude. Ryan's presence always had the ability to make her worry less about logistics and more about what mattered. Alexander watched them as if he were reading a document in another language. At first, he told himself it was nothing more than observation, merely cataloguing interactions, ensuring that the arrangement continued to serve its purpose. But the way Ryan's hand brushed Emily's arm, the casual intimacy in their exchange, struck at a place Alexander had not known existed. A cold, unfamiliar sensation tightened beneath his ribs. He found himself replaying the scene, how Emily's laugh softened, how her shoulders relaxed in Ryan's company, how effortless she was when she spoke with someone who knew her history. For the first time, Alexander realized how much he had come to value her unguarded moments, and the jealousy that stirred was small at first, an ugly, quick thing, but it grew teeth when he imagined Ryan stepping into a role Alexander had secretly been poised to claim. As they took the tour, Emily was animated, gesturing toward the children's workshop and explaining the funding challenges. Ryan listened with careful attention, occasionally nudging in a practical comment about grant applications or compliance. He moved through the community center as if returning to a familiar set on which they had both once acted. Comfortable, companionable. From the doorway, Alexander watched Emily converse with Ryan and the foundation representative. He saw the grateful nods, the way Emily's hands painted the story of the center's needs. He felt a strange, bitter pride. This woman had the power to move people, to open wallets and hearts. He felt, more painfully, that he had watched her create that power and not claimed a place at its heart. Later, over coffee in a quiet corner of the estate's conservatory, Ryan squeezed Emily's hand in a brief, supportive gesture when she spoke of the centre's newest initiative. It was a simple touch, friendly and earnest, but to Alexander it read as intimate as any vow. He excused himself before he said something he would regret, and walked out into the estate's winter garden, where the palms rustled like whispering witnesses. He could not tell himself that he felt nothing. The thought of Emily receiving warmth from another man, warmth that looked uncannily like what he wanted to give, made his stomach hollow. He thought of their contract, of how their relationship had been engineered as a shield against his mother and her social ambitions. He thought of how often he had kept his distance, a cold strategist calculating damage and benefits. And in the empty winter garden he felt a new calculation forming, metrics of the heart that had no place on spreadsheets. That night at dinner the subtle shift was palpable. Emily entered the dining room, flushed from the day's exertions, eyes bright. She greeted Alexander with the warmth she had always offered him, open, honest, unguarded. He met her with a deliberate reserve he had not intended to show. "Long day?" he asked, voice even. "Full," she replied, sliding into her seat. Ryan came by. He may have found a potential donor. She looked at him, expecting perhaps a shared flicker of excitement. Alexander's answer was flat. "Good. Make sure the details are in writing." Emily blinked, confusion knitting her brow. "Of course." "Is something wrong?" she asked, her smile faltering. He shook his head, careful, cold. No, but the distance between them had set. Emily felt it like a draft in an otherwise warm room. She ate more slowly, words clipped by the unease. Alexander's comments were measured, sometimes sharp in a way that had all the clarity of a reprimand disguised as a suggestion. The dinner progressed with the brittle etiquette of those who had more to hide than to share. After the meal, when the other residents and staff had filtered away, Emily followed Alexander into the library. She wanted to understand the sudden chill, to trace its source and soothe it. She had a talent for mending things, for finding the fault line and placing a delicate hand to steady what had cracked. "Alex?" she ventured. He straightened in front of the fireplace, hands clasped behind him. The room smelled of old leather and citrus oil from the candles. He looked at her for a long moment, the way one might consider a fragile artifact.
"Why did you bring him here?"
His voice was soft but edged, in something she recognized only as hurt. Emily blinked.
"Because Ryan is helping the center."
"He has connections."
You thought what?"
He pressed, the syllables careful, low. "I thought it would be good," she said. "I thought it would help a lot of kids."
"Alexander, it's not what you think." Her breath hitched.
She reached for his arm across the space, a conciliatory motion. He stepped back, as if burned. "What do I think?" he asked almost to himself. "That a man who clearly cares for you, who has known you in ways I haven't, might take up a place in your life I was foolish enough to assume I had." Emily's hand dropped. "You had a place. You still do. This is about the center." "It never was only about the center for me," he said, quietly, not meeting her eyes. "I told myself I could keep this contained, regulated like the terms in the contract. But when I saw you laugh with him, when I saw how easily you fit with someone who had history with you, I felt something I can't define as anything but possession." Possession. Emily's laugh was short, disbelief trembling on its edges. "Alex, we're married on paper. This is a contract. You can't—" His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "And yet I find that the papers mean less and less to me." She searched his face, found no games there, only honesty, raw and dangerous.
"Are you saying you're jealous?"
He folded his hands tighter. "I am saying I don't like the way it felt."
"I don't like that seeing you be easy with someone else made my chest tighten." I don't like that the thought of him in your life made me...
Small. Emily's eyes softened with a pity he had not expected. You don't have to be small, Alex. You can be more. You don't have to measure everything by control. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a surrender. Perhaps. He looked at her then, finally, as if trying to map every inch of the person before him. But for what it's worth, seeing you with him made me realize something I had been stupid enough to deny. She waited, heartbeat loud in the quiet. He did not phrase it as a confession. He didn't say the words she had almost hoped for, but his next line was a kind of truth. "I don't want to lose you," he said, simply. For a dizzy second, the distance between them seemed to shudder. Emily stepped closer, eyes bright with a mixture of relief and the tremulous hope that had been growing below the surface for weeks. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "not because of a contract, but because I choose this." Her voice was steady, honest, and the warmth of it wrapped around him like a promise. He nodded once, small and awkward, but there was softness in it now. The realization had come at the sting of jealousy, ugly and unwelcome, yet it had pried open a door neither of them could close. The city skyline glittered beneath the night, its glass towers alive with shifting light. From the upper floor of Bennett Enterprises, Emily stood by the wide windows, waiting for Alexander to finish a late meeting. She had grown used to the hum of his world, the sharp suits, the endless calls, the boardroom dramas, but tonight there was a strange, restless tension in the air. The click of heels announced someone's arrival long before the glass doors of the office swung open. Emily turned, expecting perhaps one of Alexander's assistants. Instead, she was met with the poised figure of a woman who moved like she owned the ground she walked upon. "Emily, is it?" The woman's voice was smooth, cultured, carrying an unmistakable note of superiority. She extended a gloved hand as though bestowing favor. "Claire Whitmore."
Alexander's old friend, Emily blinked, momentarily thrown off balance.
She shook the offered hand. It was cool, firm, and deliberate. "Yes, I'm Emily Grant, his wife." The word still tasted strange on her tongue sometimes, but tonight she said it with quiet certainty. Claire's lips curved, but her eyes flickered with something sharp. "Wife," she repeated, as if sampling a flavor she didn't quite believe belonged. "How unexpected!" Before Emily could respond, the door to the conference room opened. Alexander stepped out, his usual composure intact, until his gaze fell upon Claire. His stride faltered just slightly, but Emily caught it. Something unreadable flashed across his face. "Claire," he said, his voice lower than usual, "what are you doing here?" "I had business in the city," she replied smoothly, her gaze never leaving him.
"I thought I'd stop by."
"It's been too long." Emily watched the exchange, the ease with which Claire spoke his name, the familiarity that clung to her tone. She knew without being told this was not merely a passing acquaintance. Claire was someone who had once stood close to Alexander, perhaps too close. "I wasn't aware you were back in the States," Alexander said, recovering quickly, his voice clipped. Claire smiled faintly. "You never asked." The silence between them carried a weight that made Emily's stomach tighten. She looked at Alexander, expecting him to explain, to dismiss, but his jaw had set into that familiar line of restraint. He was not a man easily rattled, but Claire's presence seemed to shake something buried. Emily excused herself politely, retreating to the hallway under the pretense of giving them space. From the shadows, she caught glimpses of their conversation. Claire's confident tilt of her chin, Alexander's guarded replies. Though she couldn't hear every word, she felt the undercurrent. This was a woman who had once mattered, a woman who had not returned by accident. The next evening, Emily found her suspicions confirmed. At a charity gala hosted in the city's grandest ballroom, Claire appeared again, this time radiant in a crimson gown that drew the eyes of every guest. She moved effortlessly through the crowd, her laughter light, her charm undeniable.
And inevitably, she sought Alexander. Alexander, she purred, placing a hand lightly on his arm as photographers snapped pictures. You should have told me sooner about your marriage.
The press will be so fascinated. Emily stood just behind them, clutching her champagne flute. Claire turned toward her, smile wide and polished.
And you must be Emily. I've read about you in the papers.
Quite the whirlwind romance. Emily's throat tightened. She managed a polite nod. Yes, it's been
Unexpected. Claire's eyes glinted, catching the subtle hesitation.
unexpected can be dangerous, don't you think? I've always believed the best matches are made over time, with history. Don't you agree, Alexander? Alexander's expression remained unreadable, though Emily noticed the faint tension in his jaw. History doesn't always mean permanence, he replied evenly.
Sometimes the present matters more. For the first time, Claire's smile faltered, but only briefly.
Perhaps, she said lightly, though her gaze lingered on Emily with a silent challenge. Over the following days, Claire's shadow lingered wherever they went. She appeared at business functions, at luncheons, even once outside the estate gates, speaking with Margaret Bennet as though they were lifelong confidants. Emily noticed how easily Margaret warmed to Claire, the perfect socialite, educated, wealthy, with the kind of lineage Margaret admired. One evening, Emily overheard their voices in the parlour. Margaret's tone was approving. You and Alexander always seemed such a perfect pair. It's a pity things ended. Claire's laughter tinkled like glass. Some things never truly end, Mrs. Bennet. They simply—
Wait, Emily's stomach twisted.
She stepped away before they noticed her, but the words echoed long after. It wasn't only Margaret. The media too picked up the scent. Tabloids began running side-by-side photographs, Alexander Bennet and Claire Whitmore rekindling old flames. Headlines speculated that Emily was nothing more than a placeholder, a distraction. Beneath the glittering photographs, Emily saw herself reduced to a footnote, the girl who came from nothing, caught in a world she didn't belong to. And though Alexander never encouraged Claire,
never sought her out, Emily saw the way he tightened when she appeared.
she saw the history etched in the silence between them. She began to wonder if she was strong enough to fight shadows of the past, shadows that whispered she would never measure up. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. Alexander had returned late, tie loosened, exhaustion darkening his eyes. Emily waited in the sitting room, her book untouched. She had rehearsed her question all evening, her pulse unsteady. "Who is she, Alex?" she asked softly. "Really?" He froze in the doorway. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable, caught between truth and deflection. Then he sighed, crossing the room to pour himself a drink. "Claire and we were engaged once," he admitted finally, his voice low. "Years ago. Before everything with the company, before my mother tightened her grip. It ended badly." Emily's breath caught. Engaged. The words sank like a stone. "And now she's back." "Yes." He met her eyes then, his own conflicted. "But whatever she wants, it isn't me anymore. It's power, position, control." Emily swallowed hard, but the doubt had already taken root. Claire wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was a threat, armed with history, beauty, and the approval of Alexander's family. And Emily, for all her resilience, wondered how she could possibly compete. The storm didn't arrive with thunder or lightning. It came quietly, delivered in glossy pages and glowing phone screens. Early on a Monday morning, Emily walked into the breakfast room of the Bennet estate to find the staff whispering, their eyes darting toward her before dropping away in a guilty hush. On the long dining table lay a copy of the Herald, folded open to the society section. Across the page sprawled the headline in bold type, "A billion-dollar lie."
Inside the Bennet marriage contract, Emily froze.
The photograph beneath the title was one taken at the recent gala. Her hand looped through Alexander's arm, both of them caught mid-smile. But the words below stripped away the illusion. Claims of a $3 million contract marriage, citing unnamed sources who described her as a desperate girl from a grocery store family who had sold herself for survival. Her hands trembled as she read the lines. There were details too precise to be guessed, mentions of the contract's duration, even its clauses about discretion. Someone had leaked the truth, and she already knew who might have gained the most from it. Claire Whitmore. The whispers grew louder as the morning unfolded. By the time Alexander arrived at the office, journalists swarmed the steps of Bennett Enterprises shouting questions. "Mr. Bennett, is your marriage a sham? Did you really pay $3 million for a wife? Is Emily Grant a gold digger?" Cameras flashed like strikes of lightning. Alexander shielded Emily with his arm, guiding her swiftly through the chaos, his jaw clenched like steel. But no amount of composure could erase the sting of the headlines or the judgment in every eye they passed. Inside the office, the boardroom was no refuge. Alexander's advisors murmured about damage control, about how investors feared the scandal would destabilize the company. Some even dared suggest an annulment, an official severing, to reassure the market. But the worst blow came at home that evening.
Margaret Bennett confronted them in the grand parlour, the paper clutched in her manicured hand.
Her expression was thunderous, her voice sharp enough to slice through marble. "So it's true," she spat.
"All this time I defended you, Alexander, your judgment, your marriage.
And now I learn it was nothing but a transaction.
A disgrace to this family's name." "Mother," Alexander began, but Margaret cut him off with a raised hand. "No, this—" She held the paper up like evidence in a trial. "This farce ends now. You will end this contract, publicly, immediately, before she drags us all into the mud with her." Emily flinched at the venom in her words, but Alexander stepped forward, placing himself between them.
"I won't," he said firmly. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You won't?" "I won't abandon her," Alexander repeated. His voice was quiet, but resolute. Margaret's laughter was bitter. "You speak as though this girl matters, as though she is more than a mistake bought with money. She's humiliated you, Alexander. She's humiliated us all." Emily's throat tightened, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. She wanted to defend herself, to tell Margaret that the contract had never been her idea of love, that survival had forced her hand. But the weight of Margaret's contempt silenced her. Every word she might speak would sound like an excuse. "I'll leave," Emily whispered suddenly. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to look Margaret in the eye. "If that's what it takes to protect your family name, I'll go." Alexander turned to her sharply. No, but Margaret seized on the moment, pressing forward. "You see? Even she understands. She doesn't belong here, Alexander."
"End this now, before it destroys everything." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace.
Emily's heart pounded. She could feel the walls closing in, the headlines, the whispers, Margaret's scorn. All of it screamed the same truth. She was the outsider, the imposter. Finally, Alexander spoke, his voice low but unwavering. "Mother, this marriage may have begun as a contract, but it isn't one anymore.
And if you cannot accept that, then it is not Emily who will leave."
It will be me." Margaret's face blanched, shock flashing through her eyes. For the first time she was speechless. Emily stared at him, stunned. In that moment, his words were more than defiance. They were a declaration. Not to the world, not to the press, but to her. But the scandal outside raged on. By the next day, Emily's name was everywhere. Social media mocked her as the $3 million bride. Strangers dissected her life, her family, her past. Paparazzi camped outside the estate, hungry for a photograph of the girl who had sold her love. Emily avoided the internet, avoided the mirrors, avoided the eyes of the staff who could not hide their curiosity. At night, she lay awake beside Alexander, her chest aching with the weight of a truth she could not escape. No matter what he said, She was dragging him down, and somewhere beyond the headlines, she could almost hear Claire's laughter, soft, triumphant, waiting for the final crack that would break them apart. The days after the scandal felt like a slow suffocation. Everywhere Emily turned, there were whispers, flashes, and headlines. At the grocery store, two women pointed at her, their hushed voices carrying just enough for her to hear. That's her, the one who sold herself to Alexander Bennett. At a cafe, a barista who once greeted her with warmth now offered only a tight, awkward smile.
Even the staff at the Bennett estate treated her differently, polite but cautious.
As though she were a stain on polished silver that might never come clean. The air grew heavy with judgment until it seeped into Emily's bones. But it wasn't the public that broke her. It was the way Alexander's world closed in on her, suffocating from within. Margaret Bennett barely looked at her anymore, her disdain sharp enough to carve wounds without a word. At family dinners, Emily sat in silence, each fork clinking against porcelain like a reminder that she didn't belong. One evening, as rain tapped against the tall windows, Margaret delivered her final blow. "You've brought nothing but disgrace," she said coldly, her eyes locked on Emily. "Alexander may blind himself with foolishness, but I won't. If you had any dignity, girl, you'd leave." The words burrowed into Emily's chest, lodging deep in the place where her fragile strength had begun to crack. That night, she lay beside Alexander in the vast bed that suddenly felt like an ocean of silence. He slept restlessly, one hand still searching for hers in the dark, as though even in dreams he feared she would slip away. Emily stared at the ceiling, tears burning her eyes. She thought of the contract, of how it had begun, not as love, but as survival. She thought of the headlines calling her a fraud, and she thought of Alexander caught between his family, his empire, and her. She loved him. God, she loved him. But love, she realized, wasn't always enough to shield someone from ruin. By dawn, her decision was made. The suitcase was small, just enough to hold her clothes and a few treasured belongings. She moved quietly through the house, her heart thudding with each step. The hallways were still, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of old wood. When she reached the foyer, her eyes landed on the grand staircase, the place where Alexander had once taken her hand and promised protection. The memory sliced through her resolve, but she forced herself forward. The driver stood ready by the door, his eyes betraying a flicker of pity as he took the bag. Emily avoided his gaze. If she looked too long, she might crumble. As the heavy doors opened, a chill morning wind rushed in. The sky was grey, mirroring the storm inside her. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the marble, each sound echoing like a countdown. Emily, her name, spoken like a prayer, froze her in place. She turned. Alexander stood at the top of the stairs, dishevelled, his shirt half-buttoned as though he had run out without thinking. His eyes were wide, panic burning in their depths. "What are you doing?" His voice was raw, cracking against the silence. Emily swallowed hard, her chest aching. "I can't stay." He descended the stairs two at a time, his gaze never leaving hers.
No, you don't mean that. I do. The words nearly broke her. "Alexander, look around you.
Look at what this has done. To your company, to your family.
To you, they hate me."
They always will. And the longer I stay, the more I ruin everything you've built. He shook his head violently, closing the distance between them.
"I don't care about them. I don't care about the company or the whispers or—" He stopped, his hands trembling at his sides.
His breath was ragged, as though the air itself resisted him. "You can't leave me, Emily." Tears blurred her vision. She wanted to fall into his arms, to believe his words could erase the cruelty of the world outside. But she knew better.
Love wasn't a shield, it was a target.
And right now, she was the bullseye. "I have to," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He reached for her, his fingers brushing hers before she pulled away. That small movement shattered him more than 1,000 rejections could. "Emily, please." His voice cracked, desperation spilling through.
"Don't do this. Don't walk away from us." Her lips trembled.
"I'm not walking away from us."
"I'm walking away to save you." For a moment, neither of them breathed.
Then, with one last look, one last silent confession of love, Emily turned and stepped into the waiting car. The door shut with a hollow thud, like the closing of a chapter. The driver pulled away, the mansion shrinking in the distance. Emily pressed her forehead to the glass, tears streaming freely now, knowing she had just left behind the man who had changed everything. On the driveway, Alexander stood frozen in the rain, watching the car disappear. His heart pounded with a terror he had never known, a hollow ache spreading through his chest. For years he had believed himself invincible, powerful, untouchable. But in that moment, stripped of all control, he realized the truth. He was afraid. Not of scandal, not of his mother, not of the empire he had built. He was afraid of losing her. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Bennett understood what it meant to be powerless. The silence in the mansion was unbearable after Emily left. Her absence lingered in every room, her laughter echoing faintly in the halls, her perfume clinging to the linens, the warmth of her presence now a hollow void. Alexander moved through the house like a restless ghost, unable to sleep, unable to focus. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the way she had looked at him in the foyer. Torn apart, desperate, but resolute. The empire he had built, the legacy he had guarded, suddenly meant nothing. Without her, his wealth was dust. His power was irrelevant. Days blurred into nights. He sent people to find her, private investigators, security teams, even old friends. But Emily had vanished into the city's shadows, slipping away with a determination he both admired and hated. She was protecting him, but all he felt was the slow, searing ache of loss. Finally, when he could no longer bear the emptiness, Alexander made a decision that shook the very core of who he was. He would not beg behind closed doors. He would not hide his love in shadows. If the world wanted a spectacle, then he would give them one, on his own terms. The press conference was called within 24 hours. It was held at the Bennett Corporation headquarters, in the glittering atrium where glass walls soared high above and cameras always waited for scandal. The media swarmed the place, their lenses and microphones hungry for blood. Headlines had already written themselves: Alexander Bennett to address wife scandal. Margaret Bennett stood at the edge of the stage, her lips pressed thin.
"This is reckless," she hissed.
"You will destroy yourself, Alexander. The board will never forgive you. The family name will never recover." He straightened his tie, his gaze like steel.
"I don't care." Her eyes widened in disbelief.
"You would choose her, a woman who deceived you for all of this?" "She never deceived me." His voice was low, firm. "I asked her to marry me for money."
"I dragged her into this farce."
"If anyone is guilty, it's me." Margaret's composure cracked, just slightly.
"You don't understand." "No," he interrupted sharply, his voice laced with finality. "You don't understand."
"For the first time in my life, I know what matters. And it's not shareholders or family pride or empire.
It's her." Before she could respond, he stepped away onto the stage where the blinding lights and hundreds of eyes awaited him. The room fell silent as Alexander approached the podium.
Cameras clicked in rapid bursts, capturing his every move. He adjusted the microphone, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he let the silence stretch. Then his voice cut through the tension. "You've heard the rumors. You've read the headlines. So let me tell you the truth." A ripple went through the crowd. "Yes, Emily Carter and I began our marriage under a contract. I paid her to be my wife. It was a transaction. Cold, calculated, and, at the time, necessary." He paused. the weight of his words sinking in. But what began as a contract became something else.
Something real, gasps echoed.
Reporters scribbled furiously. "I fell in love with her," he continued, his voice stronger now, carrying conviction that silenced every murmur.
Emily's not a gold digger.
"She is not a fraud. She is the woman who stood by me when no one else would.
She defended me against my own family.
She taught me what loyalty means, what love means. Without her, I'm nothing more than a man with money, and money can't warm an empty bed." The room was utterly still, all eyes locked on him. "If you want someone to blame, blame me.
If you want someone to destroy, destroy me.
But leave her out of your cruelty. She does not deserve your scorn. She deserves your respect." His words rang out like a vow, echoing in the glass atrium. Then, with a steady breath,
He delivered the final blow, and to Emily,
"If you're watching this, I don't care if the world turns against us.
I don't care if I lose everything I've built. I love you. I love you in a way I can't contain, can't deny, and I will fight for you until my last breath. Come back to me, Emily, not as a contract."
Not as a bargain, but as my wife in truth." The atrium erupted into chaos, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. But Alexander didn't hear any of it. He stepped away from the podium, his heart pounding, his chest heaving with the force of everything he had just unleashed. For the first time in his life, he wasn't Alexander Bennett, the CEO. He was Alexander Bennett, the man. A man stripped bare, vulnerable but unafraid. Hours later, the press conference was everywhere. Clips of his speech replayed on news channels. Social media exploded with debate. Some called him foolish, reckless. Others, for the first time, admired him not for his wealth, but for his courage. And somewhere in the city, in a small rented apartment with peeling walls and a single suitcase by the bed, Emily watched. Her hands trembled as she held the remote, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. She had expected Alexander to move on, to protect himself, to bury what they had shared under duty and pride. But instead, he had chosen her. Publicly, unapologetically. For the first time since she had left, hope bloomed in her chest. A fragile, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, love was stronger than fear. The city glowed with restless energy that night, neon lights flickering against rain-slicked streets. Inside a modest apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, Emily sat curled on the couch, the television still muted on Alexander's press conference replay. His words replayed in her mind endlessly. Every syllable burned into her chest. "Come back to me."
Not as a contract.
Not as a bargain, but as my wife in truth. She wanted to believe him. Her heart ached to run back into his arms, to let herself be consumed by the fierce certainty in his voice. But fear lingered too, the fear of being hurt again, of dragging him down, of not being enough for the world he came from. The knock on her door startled her. It was firm, insistent, echoing through the small space. Emily hesitated, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She hadn't given this address to anyone. Slowly, she rose, her bare feet silent against the floor. When she opened the door,
her breath caught. Alexander stood there,
drenched from the rain, his suit rumpled, tie gone, hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes, those piercing, restless eyes, found hers instantly, as though the world had narrowed to nothing but this doorway. For a long, fragile moment, neither spoke. Then Alexander's lips parted, his voice low but urgent. "Emily," her heart stuttered.
How did you find me?"
His mouth curved into something between a grimace and a smile.
"I told you before, I don't lose what matters to me. Not anymore." She swallowed hard, stepping back slightly, the instinct to shield herself colliding with the longing to let him in. "Alexander, you shouldn't be here."
"The press, your family, your company, none of it matters," he cut in, stepping forward just enough that the threshold became unbearably small between them. His voice was raw, stripped of the polished armor he usually wore. "The only thing that matters is you." Her chest tightened. She shook her head, though tears already stung her eyes.
You don't mean that. You're just caught up in the scandal, trying to fix what's broken. I mean every damn word. His tone sharpened, fierce and desperate. Emily, I've lived my life building walls.
Money, power, control, they kept everyone out. But you, his hand lifted, trembling slightly as he gestured toward her. You broke through. You saw me. Not the CEO, not the Bennett name. Me, and I can't go back to that emptiness now. Not without you. Her lips trembled, but no words came. He exhaled shakily, then reached into his pocket. For a moment, she thought he might pull out a ring. The ring from their contract marriage, a reminder of what had started all this.
Instead, his hand emerged empty, curling into a fist at his side. I don't have a ring, he admitted, voice husky.
Because this isn't about symbols or transactions.
This isn't about contracts or bargains.
This is about love, the kind that terrifies me, the kind I can't live without. Her vision blurred with tears, and she clutched the doorframe as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Emily Carter," Alexander said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm asking you, not as a CEO, not as a man trying to buy time, but as someone who loves you more than air itself. Will you be my wife? Truly this time?"
No contracts, no conditions.
Just us. The silence that followed stretched, filled only by the patter of rain against the street below. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Every wound, every doubt, every shard of fear screamed at her to hold back. And yet, underneath it all, her heart pulsed with an undeniable truth. She loved him. She always had. Her knees buckled, and before she realized it, tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, the word fragile but fierce. "Yes, Alexander."
I'll be your wife.
"Not because of a contract, but because I love you." His shoulders sagged, the tension breaking like a dam. He stepped inside, closing the distance in 2 strides, and pulled her into his arms. The kiss that followed was not desperate, but profound, an anchoring, a promise, a declaration that this time nothing would tear them apart. The world outside still buzzed with judgment and scandal, but within the 4 walls of that tiny apartment, they found something invincible. They sat together on the couch, the storm outside fading to a drizzle. Emily leaned against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I don't care what your mother thinks," she murmured. "I don't care what the tabloids say."
As long as we're together, I'll fight with you. Alexander pressed a kiss into her hair, his arms tightening around her.
"You won't fight alone.
I'll shield you from every storm.
I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you and to the world that we belong together." For the first time since their contract began, there was no bargaining, no pretense, no fear. Only love, real and undeniable. And as dawn broke across the city, washing the apartment in pale gold, Emily Carter and Alexander Bennett sat side by side, no longer bound by paper or pretense, but by the kind of love that could survive every trial. The Bennett estate had never looked so alive. On the morning of the wedding, sunlight spilled across manicured gardens and glimmered against white silk drapes that fluttered gently in the breeze. Rows of ivory chairs lined the lawn, each one filled with people who had once whispered, doubted, or criticized, but who now waited in hushed anticipation. Reporters had been barred at the gates, replaced by friends, family, and employees who had seen the storm Alexander and Emily had weathered. The air was heavy with roses and lilies, their scent mingling with the crisp autumn wind. A quartet played, softly near the altar, their strings carrying through the open space like a promise. Alexander stood at the front, dressed in a tailored navy suit that fit him like armor, though today he didn't feel like a man preparing for battle. For once, he felt at peace. His hands were steady, his heart racing not with fear, but with certainty. Around him, the murmurs of the guests faded into nothing. All he could think of was her. Emily stepped into the garden, her arm hooked through the crook of a friend's for support. The moment she appeared, every head turned. The hush was immediate, as though the earth itself paused to watch. Her gown was simple, elegant, silk that clung to her with grace, a train trailing behind like flowing water. A veil framed her face, but nothing could hide the way her eyes shone when they met Alexander's. She had never looked more radiant, not because of the dress or the flowers or the ceremony, but because she walked toward him with love that burned brighter than any doubt. Alexander's chest tightened. He had seen Emily in countless ways, defiant, hurt, laughing, broken, but this was the woman who had changed him forever, who had pulled him from loneliness into light. As she reached him, her hand slid into his, warm and trembling. His fingers closed around hers instinctively, a perfect fit, as though this moment had always been waiting for them. The officiant began, his voice rising and falling with reverence. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander Bennett and Emily Carter, not in contract, but in love. What was once a bargain is now a bond. What began as necessity has become destiny." Guests smiled, some blinking back tears. Even Margaret Bennett, seated in the front row, sat straighter, her eyes glistening with an emotion she had hidden for too long. The ice that had once defined her had begun to melt, touched by Emily's quiet strength and Alexander's unwavering choice. When it was time for vows, Alexander turned to Emily, his hand still wrapped around hers. "Emily," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying across the garden. "The first time I asked you to be my wife, I was a coward. I offered you money instead of love, a contract instead of a future.
I thought that was all I had to give, but you showed me how wrong I was. You gave me more than loyalty. You gave me yourself. You taught me what it means to love, to fight, to trust." His throat tightened, but he pressed on, eyes locked on hers.
"So today I stand here not as a man making a deal, but as a man making a vow. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to fight for you, and to love you until my last breath. You are no longer my contract. You are my home." Emily's tears slipped freely now, her lips trembling as she drew in a breath. "Alexander," she began, her voice soft but clear. "When I first walked into your world, I thought I didn't belong. I was just a girl with debts and desperation. You were cold, untouchable, impossible. But beneath all of that I found a man who was lonely, who carried too much on his shoulders, who needed love more than he knew. I didn't plan to fall for you, but I did. Slowly, painfully, completely." Her fingers tightened around his. "So today I give you my heart without fear, without conditions. Not for money, not for protection, but for love. Pure and simple."
You are no longer the man I married by contract. You are the man I choose every day for the rest of my life. The garden erupted into soft sniffles and smiles, the officiant nodding as if sealing the moment himself. With these vows exchanged,
"And with the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Alexander, you may kiss your bride." Alexander wasted no time. He lifted her veil, his hand cupping her cheek, and kissed her with a tenderness that silenced the crowd. It was not the kiss of a man claiming possession. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found freedom in love. The guests rose to their feet in applause, the sound swelling through the garden. Margaret Bennet dabbed her eyes discreetly, though she would never admit it aloud. Alexander and Emily pulled apart, their foreheads resting together, their breaths mingling. "We did it," Emily whispered, half laughing, half crying. "No," Alexander murmured, his lips brushing hers. "You did it. You changed everything." The celebration lasted long into the night. Laughter echoed through the estate, glasses clinked, and music spilled across the lawn. Emily and Alexander danced under strings of lights, their bodies moving in rhythm, eyes locked as though no one else existed. For the first time, their marriage was not about survival, not about family expectations, not about appearances. It was about love, real, raw, and enduring. And as stars scattered across the velvet sky, Alexander knew, with unshakable certainty, the contract that had brought them together was nothing compared to the vow that now bound them. This was no longer a story of a deal. This was the story of a love that had endured every storm and emerged unbreakable.